Among the green hills and the enchanting valleys of Wales, in the 6th century, a boy was born who was destined to become the patron of his land, Saint David of Wales. His birth was surrounded by divine signs, and his family, of noble lineage, soon realized that he had been chosen for a special mission. According to tradition, David was the son of Sant and Non, both of royal lineage. His mother, Saint Non, suffered terrible pains during childbirth, and at the moment of David's birth, a violent storm is said to have shaken the region, testifying to the greatness of his future life. From a very young age, David showed a contemplative spirit and an inclination for the religious life. He was sent to a monastery for his education, where he stood out for his piety and discipline. His desire for knowledge and for prayer made him an exemplary student, preparing him for his future mission. Under the guidance of St. Paulinus, one of the great masters of Celtic Christianity, David immersed himself in the scriptures and in the study of theology. His life was marked by intense ascetic practice, something he would maintain throughout his journey in faith. Tradition tells us that David possessed a powerful voice, capable of touching even the hardest of hearts. His master, St. Paulinus, is said to have been impressed by his wisdom and dedication, recognizing in him a future leader of the church in Britain. Feeling God's call, David decided to devote himself to the monastic life. To that end, he withdrew to a remote place where he began his life of prayer and penance. His desire was to imitate Christ in poverty, in charity, and in total surrender to God. However, God had greater plans for him. After years of formation, David was ordained a priest and began his work of evangelization. In a time of instability and resistance to Christianity, his presence would be a light for many. With missionary zeal, David traveled through villages and remote regions, preaching the word and converting hearts. His witness of life attracted crowds, and many wished to follow his example, embracing the faith with fervor. The saint realized that it was necessary to establish strong Christian communities that could uphold the people's faith. Thus, he founded several monasteries, which would become centers of spirituality and formation for new generations. The most famous of these monasteries was Monivia, where David established a strict monastic rule. Life there was austere. The monks had to work with their own hands, refrain from eating meat, and dedicate themselves entirely to prayer. Besides discipline, David demanded a profound spirit of charity. He taught that true holiness was manifested in love for one's neighbor, and for that reason, the monks should care for those in need and welcome pilgrims. His inspiring example caused many young people to forsake the world to pursue the religious life. David became a respected spiritual master, attracting disciples from various parts of Britain and beyond. It is said that among his followers were figures who would later become famous saints, such as Saint Talo and Saint Gildas. This shows the impact of his life and his legacy in the Celtic Church. David's fame grew so much that it reached the ears of the bishops and leaders of the church. Therefore, he was invited to attend the Synod of Llandewi Brefi, a council that addressed doctrinal issues and ecclesiastical organization. At the council, his eloquence and wisdom were so remarkable that he was chosen to succeed the Bishop of Caerleon, becoming the primate of the Welsh Church. This event solidified his position as one of the most important figures in Celtic Christianity. Humble and detached from power, David did not regard his new position as a privilege, but as a call to service. He continued living austerely and devoting himself to prayer and to caring for the people. His leadership brought unity to the church in Wales. In a time of disputes and uncertainties, he worked tirelessly to strengthen the faith and morality of both the clergy and the faithful. During his episcopate, David performed miracles that reinforced his holiness. One of the best known took place at the Synod of Llandewi Brefi, when, while preaching, the ground beneath his feet miraculously rose up, forming a mound so that everyone could hear him. This event so impressed those present that it became a symbol of his spiritual authority. Many came to see him as a true prophet and a guide sent by God to lead the people. Despite his high position, David never abandoned simplicity. He continued living like a monk, maintaining an austere lifestyle and teaching by example. The people loved and respected him deeply. To many, he was more than a religious leader. He was a spiritual father whose intercession and counsel guided their lives. As bishop, David encouraged the building of churches and schools, ensuring that the faith took deep root in the hearts of the Welsh. He knew that only a well-instructed faith could withstand the trials of time. Devotion to St. David began to grow even during his lifetime. Pilgrims came from afar to see him, seeking his blessing and guidance. Many bore witness to cures and graces obtained through his intercession. Besides his pastoral work, David dedicated himself to writing and study. His reflections and teachings influenced Celtic monastic spirituality, which spread throughout several regions of Europe. His love for God and for neighbor made him a true shepherd. He would not rest while there were souls to be guided to the kingdom of heaven. His mission was only beginning, and his deeds would continue to echo through the centuries. St. David continued his mission with fervor, facing challenges and resistance with the serenity of a true servant of God. His example of monastic life attracted not only monks, but also ordinary faithful who saw in him a model of holiness. One of the most famous miracles attributed to David happened when a group of pilgrims approached Monastic, seeking his blessing. Among them was a blind man who, upon being touched by the saint, immediately regained his sight. This miraculous cure spread quickly throughout the region, further increasing the saint's reputation. Many began traveling great distances to meet him, certain that he was an instrument of divine grace. However, David did not see miracles as a reason for boasting. He always attributed them to God's mercy, reminding everyone that he was merely a humble servant of the Lord, called to guide souls to salvation. His commitment to evangelization led him through various regions, many of which were still resistant to Christianity. On his journeys, he faced pagan leaders who saw the Christian faith as a threat to their dominion. On one of these missions, David arrived in a village whose inhabitants were immersed in idolatry. With patience and love, he began to preach about Christ, demonstrating the power of the true God through prayer and the sacraments. At first, he was received with suspicion, but his kindness and the miracles he performed convinced many to abandon their old ways and turn to Christianity. There he founded a new community of faith. David's missionary zeal was not limited to Wales. Some traditions suggest that he traveled to Cornwall, Ireland, and even Brittany, strengthening the church and establishing monasteries. During his journeys, he always upheld the rigor of his monastic life. He fasted frequently, slept on stones, and avoided any kind of luxury, showing that true riches lay in communion with God. This discipline inspired his disciples, who likewise adopted an austere life. The monks who followed David lived in extreme simplicity, consuming only bread, herbs, and water, rejecting any indulgence. Despite the harshness of their life, David radiated joy and peace. His face shone with a celestial serenity, and many testified that merely being in his presence was already a blessing. As a bishop, he played a fundamental role in organizing the church in Wales. He strengthened the dioceses, encouraged the formation of the clergy, and promoted unity among Celtic Christians, who sometimes differed in certain practices. One of his greatest efforts was to fight Pelagian heresy, which still persisted in parts of the region. He defended the doctrine of Christ's grace, teaching that salvation could not be achieved through human effort alone. His preaching against Pelagianism was so effective that many heretics converted, returning to the true faith. David did not condemn them, but welcomed them with mercy, showing them the path of truth. The saint's life was filled with divine manifestations. On several occasions, monks reported seeing angels around him, protecting him and guiding his actions. Some traditions speak even of mystical visions that he experienced. One such account says that, during a night of prayer, David had a vision of Christ, blessing his mission and assuring him that his work would bear fruit for many generations. This strengthened him even more on his path. The Welsh people began to regard him as a true spiritual father. He not only guided the church, but also interceded for the needs of the people, who saw him as a pastor who never abandoned his sheep. One of his mottos was, "Be joyful, keep the faith, and do the little things." This simple yet profound phrase reflected his teaching that holiness lies in daily actions and in faithfulness to God. This practical spirituality made his message accessible to everyone. He did not preach only to monks and priests, but also to farmers, fishermen, and warriors, showing that all were called to holiness. Even in moments of persecution and difficulty, David never gave in to discouragement. When some pagan kings tried to hinder his mission, he responded with prayer and humility, converting even his own enemies. On one occasion, a pagan leader tried to assassinate him, sending soldiers to kill him. When the warriors arrived, they found David in deep prayer, and an inexplicable fear came over them, causing them to abandon violence. These signs of divine protection made his figure even more revered. Many began to see him as a special envoy of God, whose life was a reflection of heavenly grace. Despite his growing fame, David always rejected any form of pride. He continued living in his simple cell, tilling the land with his own hands and devoting himself to serving the poor. In an age when war and violence were common, he preached peace and forgiveness. His presence was a living testimony that the kingdom of God is not imposed by force, but by love. This message touched even the hardest hearts. Many warriors and leaders surrendered to his teaching, abandoning war and becoming protectors of the church. David also encouraged Christian education. He founded monastic schools where young people could learn not only theology, but also medicine, agriculture, and the arts, becoming men of faith and culture. His monastery in Missionary became one of the most important religious centers of the time. From there, many missionaries went out to spread the gospel to other lands, spreading the light of the faith. The years passed, but David showed no sign of weariness. Even in old age, he continued preaching, teaching, and serving the people with the same enthusiasm as in his youth. His love for the Eucharist was immense. He celebrated Holy Mass with deep reverence, teaching that at that moment, Christ truly became present among the faithful. David's influence reached beyond the borders of Wales. His fame reached Rome, and the Pope himself recognized his holiness, granting him the title of Archbishop of the Welsh. This honor did not change his humble heart. He viewed his authority not as a privilege, but as an even greater responsibility to guide the people with love and fidelity to the gospel. His impact was so great that even in his lifetime, many already considered him a saint. He was a beacon of hope for the Celtic Christians who faced difficult times. His teachings, his miracles, and his unshakable faith made him a model not only for his era, but for all future generations. His legacy was already sealed, yet his mission on earth had not yet come to an end. As time passed, David began to feel that his earthly journey was drawing to a close. He did not fear death, for he knew that his true homeland was heaven, where he would meet his Lord. In his last sermons, he urged the people to remain steadfast in the faith, to trust in God's providence, and never to abandon charity. His final message would serve as a spiritual testament for the entire Welsh nation. Weighed down by the years, St. David felt that his earthly mission was coming to its end. Nevertheless, his soul remained strong and full of zeal for the service of God and the Welsh people. Even weakened by age, he continued to celebrate Holy Mass daily, dedicating long hours to prayer and meditation. His wish was to leave his community prepared to carry on the work of the gospel after his passing. Sensing the nearness of his death, David gathered his monks and closest disciples. With calm words, he encouraged them to persevere in the faith and to follow the path of holiness, regardless of the difficulties that might arise. His final teaching to his followers was simple but profound. Be joyful, Keep the faith and do the little things with love. These words would echo down through the centuries, becoming a motto for Welsh Christians. The signs of his holiness became even more evident. Reports state that in his final days, a heavenly glow surrounded his cell, and those who visited him felt a deep peace in his presence. On the day of his death, David summoned the strength to celebrate Mass one last time. With great reverence, he received the Eucharist, surrendering his soul to God with a look of profound devotion. At the end of the celebration, he turned to his monks and with a serene smile said, "The time has come. My spirit returns to the Creator, and my heart is at peace." With these words, he bowed his head and departed for eternity. His death was not marked by sadness, but by a feeling of joy and hope. The monks who were with him bore witness to a supernatural light filling the place, as a sign that the saint had been received into heavenly glory. News of his passing spread rapidly throughout Wales and beyond. The people wept for their loss, but at the same time celebrated his life and the legacy he left behind. Multitudes of the faithful traveled to Monivia to pay their last respects. For several days, the city was filled with pilgrims who came to venerate the saint's body and give thanks for the graces received through his intercession. It is said that during the funeral, the monks' chanting was accompanied by angelic voices, and a celestial fragrance filled the monastery, clear signs of David's sanctity. After his burial, miracles began to occur at his tomb. Many sick people who went to his grave returned cured, and various graces were granted to those who requested his intercession. These miracles further strengthened the veneration of Saint David, and his fame for holiness spread rapidly throughout all of Christendom. Many monasteries and churches were dedicated to him, keeping his memory alive. Pope Calixtus II, in the 12th century, officially recognized David's holiness, canonizing him and confirming his status as the patron saint of Wales. This recognition solidified his importance in the history of the Church. St. David's tomb became one of the most important pilgrimage sites of the Middle Ages. Traditions claimed that 2 pilgrimages to Monivia were equivalent to 1 pilgrimage to Rome, and 3 were equivalent to a journey to Jerusalem. Kings, bishops, and faithful from all parts of the Christian world traveled to the place where the saint had lived and served God. Devotion to him spread, and many churches were built in his honor in various regions. Beyond his religious influence, St. David became a symbol of the national identity of the Welsh people. His name and his legacy were remembered in times of difficulty as an inspiration to maintain faith and hope. March 1st, the date of his death, was established as St. David's Day, becoming the main religious and cultural celebration in Wales. To this day, the Welsh wear daffodils and leeks, symbols associated with the saint. Over the centuries, his image has been depicted in various works of art and stained glass windows, always with a serene countenance and an aura of holiness, reflecting his life of devotion and service. In his iconography, St. David is often portrayed holding a dove on his shoulder, symbolizing the presence of the Holy Spirit who guided him in his mission and preaching. His monastery in Monivia became St. David's Cathedral, one of the most sacred places in Celtic Christianity. To this day, the faithful and pilgrims visit the site, seeking inspiration and spiritual strength. The monastic rule he established continued to influence generations of religious, serving as a model of austere life devoted to prayer, work, and charity. His influence can also be seen in the missionary movement that arose among the Celtic monks, taking the Christian faith to various parts of Europe, including France, Germany, and even Italy. Many saints were inspired by his example, and his spirituality remained alive within the Church's tradition, especially treasured by those seeking a life of greater surrender to God. The centuries passed, but the name of St. David was never forgotten. In Wales, he remains a central figure of culture and faith, remembered with great affection and devotion. In times of war, persecution, and hardship, the Welsh turned to him, seeking his protection and intercession with God. To many, he was a true spiritual father who continued guiding his people from heaven. His simple and accessible spirituality remains an invitation to all Christians to live with joy, keep the faith, and do the small things with love. This teaching is timeless and continues to touch hearts. Today, his liturgical feast is celebrated not only in Wales, but also in many parts of the world, especially where there are communities of Welsh descent. During these celebrations, the faithful participate in special masses, processions, and cultural events that recall his life and example of holiness. His legacy is still a beacon for many. St. David's story teaches us that true greatness lies not in wealth or power, but in humility, faith, and service to one's neighbor. His life was a reflection of the gospel in its purest form. His witness reminds us that holiness is within everyone's reach, and that even the simplest actions can have an eternal impact when done with love and dedication to God. His message still resonates today. It is not necessary to perform great feats to please God, but rather to live each day with faithfulness and love for the Lord. St. David's example continues to inspire priests, religious, and lay people to live their faith with authenticity and fervor, always seeking the kingdom of God above all else. In the face of the challenges of the modern world, his life is a reminder that prayer, sacrifice, and charity remain the sure paths to holiness. Thus, the memory of St. David remains alive, not only in the hearts of the Welsh, but of all those who seek an example of true faith and surrender to God. Centuries after his death, St. David continues to be a central figure of the Christian faith in Wales and beyond. His life, marked by humility and service to God, resonates through the generations as a witness of true holiness. His monastery in Missionary, transformed into St. David's Cathedral, remained one of the most sacred sites in Celtic Christianity. During the Middle Ages, it became a pilgrimage destination for kings, saints, and faithful from all over Europe. St. David's influence was not confined to Wales. Missionaries inspired by his life brought his spirituality to various parts of the continent, leaving a profound mark on the Christian monastic tradition. To this day, his feast on March 1st is celebrated with fervor in Wales. Streets are decorated, churches hold solemn masses, and people wear the traditional symbols associated with the saint, such as daffodils and leeks. St. David's message remains relevant. Be joyful, keep the faith, and do the little things with love. His legacy transcends time, reminding us that true greatness lies in faithfulness to God and service to neighbor.